Hi, I'm Dr. Yun Saxena, Associate Dean for Education at UNMC College of Dentistry. I've been an educator for over 20 years, having taught in didactic and preclinical courses and dental clinics to dental students, and also faculty development at the university and national level. Over the years, I've had an interest in cognitive psychology and lent on research and science to inform my teaching. I have 3 teenage daughters and made these slides on my own time to help them. Then I got to thinking I should share this with my students too, so here we are. No, I don't know everything. I'm still learning, but I'll share some tips for successful learning based on research. So overall, here's an overview. I'm going to be talking to you about learning, specifically active learning, interleaving, retrieval practice, forgetting, and spaced practice. Learn first, then review. And memory is essential for learning. You can't review or remember something you haven't learned properly. For example, when you don't remember someone's name, might it be because you never really knew their name in the first place? Maybe you didn't hear it properly, so if you didn't learn it in the first place, then you can't remember it. Okay. Learning is stronger when it matters. We try to time the teaching close to when you need it. We call it just-in-time learning. Learning is stronger when it's personal, when you can relate to it. And we try to make it concrete as well, so the abstract is made real. And we try to give you real examples so you can see how it's relevant and real. Learning is also stronger when it's harder. You kind of forget a little. When the mind has to work harder, the learning sticks better. In fact, when you feel that something is familiar and you recognize it, it gives you the illusion of mastery. It makes you believe you know it all. An example that lures you in is when you reread your notes, repeating facts to try to burn something in your memory. The statements look familiar to you, so you think you must know it. And, well, there's a reason also why you might make flashcards, that you only put one fact or question per card. And if you put several down but didn't quite get that last fact, it's easy to say to yourself that you must know it, so you've got them all. If they were separate, you'd realize you need to spend more time on the one that you didn't quite get. And it's the same reason you need to break concepts down, so when you go to your professor, instead of saying, I don't understand a topic A, you spend time beforehand so you can narrow it down and be more efficient and say you don't understand subtopic B. The concept of active learning is probably familiar to you, but do you really do it? Before you go to class, pre-read the references if there are any, and see what the prof has posted and review the material. That way it's easy to process material when you see it again. Ask questions whilst you're reading it, like how and why, and then discuss the content with others. Whilst you're in class, make notes. Note-taking supports retention of factual knowledge. In 1996, there was a study where college students either took notes in class or did not, and the note-taking group scored better than the group who took no notes during the lecture. Because, well, note-taking prompts you to think whilst you're doing it. And then they found that in another study that writing is actually better than typing. You're still taking notes, so typing is better than nothing, but writing is better than typing. So writing by hand activates more regions of the brain than typing. There was a study in 2012. And then it forces your brain to process information in a more detailed way, which helps you successfully load that information to your memory. There's a cognitive scientist who noted that students remember what they think about. So with laptops, when you're typing things in, it may make it easier to mindlessly record what you hear instead of thinking about what you're learning, making those connections and focusing on what's most important. If you can't recall the material, maybe you never learned in the first place. So something that helps is to link and try to connect these ideas and concepts and organize them so it's easier to learn and remember. For instance, you ask yourself, well, how are things similar or different? How do things work together? How do they fit into things you've learned previously or experienced? Or your memories? I mean, the more you can explain how your new learning relates to your prior knowledge, then the stronger your new learning will be. And the more connections you create, that will help you remember it later. You also need to check for accuracy, whether it's notes, references, or with your prof, if you're not sure. And then this can happen outside the classroom or outside of your study space, for example, when you're walking somewhere. Then you should really find and collect and create examples to help you make these connections and links, so to understand and remember it. And then when you come up with these examples, also check with your prof if these are good examples. You don't want bad ones. And just to be sure that you're making the right connections and you're really understanding the concepts. So these may be handy also when you have to write essays and to back up your statements, having these examples. Another way to actively learn is to explain things to others, even to your dog if you have one. Saying things out loud makes you commit to your idea, but you should be open to being corrected if it's wrong. So in order to help others understand something, you need to really know the material and understand it yourself. One way of teaching and learning is by keeping things in blocks. In this top row, the topics are arranged in blocks. In the second row, the blocks of topics are mixed up. This is an example of interleaving. Science has more recently shown that moving on to the next topic before complete mastery of the one before it is actually better because of long-term advantages. Interleaving by mixing things up can seem confusing and slow and frustrating because people don't think they've grasped what they need to know before moving on. So even though they know the spiral will take them back to it, it can be really difficult. So mastery and long-term retention is actually better with interleaving. Interleaving is harder because you have to think about the context more. Assessing the conditions, which tools you need, and comprehension is needed. It'll feel harder than studying the same thing for a long time. And this is what is needed in the real world. For example, when you see patients and attending to their needs, when you do comprehensive care, you could be doing anything for that patient. You have to pull from one area of expertise or another, and sometimes it's unpredictable. So when you're studying, go over the topics in different orders to strengthen your understanding. Solving the same types of problems all together gets good results initially. For example, when you do problem sets, I've got some baseball examples here, or batting using the same types of pitches. Mix up the practice is hard initially, but research has shown it increased final performance by 215%, even a week later. In real life, we don't always know what is coming next. We need to use our problem solving, our knowledge and skills in random order. Some examples research have used a batting practice for baseball or beanbag tosses, where the same drill is used in a block. For example, the same type of pitch or the same distance for the toss versus mixing up the pitches for the batter or mixing up the distances for the beanbag tosses, even without practicing the test distance. Those in the varied practice groups, when they mix it up, were much more successful on the test day. An example of this is if you're using flashcards. Change up the topics every 25 minutes with a 5-minute break between sets. But don't switch topics too quickly. The minimum amount of time should be about 20 to 30 minutes on the same topic. Climbing Mount Everest is not a one-day experience. Sometimes you have to take a step back to move forward. To climb Mount Everest, you need to go through 3 camps past base camp. But you can't just go from base camp to camp 1 to camp 2 to camp 3 to the summit. If you did that, you'd die. Instead, your body needs to acclimatize. So you go from base camp to camp 1, back to base camp, and then climb to camp 1, then to camp 2, and then back to base camp. Then camp 1, 2, then 3, then back to base camp. And then over a month, you'll be able to summit if the weather cooperates. In the same way, your academic journey will have its ups and downs, but you need to keep an eye on your long-term goals and appreciate your gains that will get you there, even when it's hard. Alison Levine was the team captain of the first American women's Everest expedition. She wrote the book On the Edge. If you hear her inspirational speeches, she talks about how difficult it was near the summit of Mount Everest. For every step you take, you need to take 5 to 10 breaths. And it takes a few hours to climb a couple of 100 feet. Imagine being physically and mentally exhausted because that's what it's like. She wrote, "You just have to be absolutely relentless about putting one foot in front of the other. Otherwise, it's just too overwhelming." So what helped her was that she's broke it down one rock or landmark at a time. So one app that may help motivate you to achieve your goals is Habitica. It's a free habit building and productivity app. So one step at a time, even though it feels hard, and it should feel hard, then that's how you should go about your learning as well. Retrieval practice is a method of effective studying that should help you with your learning. Without looking at your class materials, this is a technique. You write or sketch everything you know and be thorough. Then you've got to check for accuracy for important points missed. These are some tools you can use to help jog your memory. For some people, cues such as pictures and diagrams make things easier to remember. Some refer to this as dual coding. If you make your own flashcard, it's recommended you include a picture alongside the words to make it more memorable. Pictures can be directly related. For example, an actual picture of a neurovascular bundle. Or you can use the mnemonic VAN, vein, artery, nerve. Or you could use associative imagery, which may be indirectly related. For example, a van. The weirder this is, the easier it is to remember. So you could use Scooby-Doo's van, the mystery machine. Songs can also help jog your memory. Schoolhouse Rock has helped many people remember the preamble to the Constitution of the United States, that that a noun is a person, place, or a thing. My 14-year-old daughter remembers over 100 places for pi with the help of a song. Mnemonics can also help jog your memory, but in order to use these cues, you need to actually know the material first. Otherwise, the phrase to help with the cranial nerves, "Oh, once one takes the anatomy final, very good vacation ahead," won't help you. Of course, there are other mnemonics for the cranial nerves, but the principle is the same. You need to know the material first. For retrieval practice, you could use practice tests, but better yet, make your own. Because making your own, it really is the best because you're processing the information in order to make them. Like you're writing things down, you're having to think really hard what you want to put on and think about the best ways of remembering it and what will help you. You can trade practice tests that you make with each other and quiz each other. So that gives you even more resources. And then as you retrieve things, I mentioned before, you try to connect them to help strengthen your neural pathways. That's the reason why you do that. Try to look for concepts, themes, and relationships. If you use flashcards, study both sides of the card in both directions so you know the material in different contexts and be able to recall them more easily. Unfortunately, forgetting happens quickly. we've all experienced this. It's kind of scary how quickly that happens. So if you try to review the material to remember it, or in other words, forget less. If you review the material in increasing intervals of time, the forgetting curve flattens out and you get better long-term retention. Quizzes are actually good for you because they force you to review the material. I know a lot of you don't like the frequent quizzing, but just know that professors know what they're doing here. They're trying to help you remember by forcing you to review the material. Testing is a learning tool because as you're taking the quiz or the test, it cements your learning. If you have wrong answers and you get the feedback through reviews, you learn better. And make sure you take advantages of the opportunities to review your tests or exams with your profs. The best time to review the material is when you start forgetting it. It makes it harder. So each time you review, you become more efficient, and it takes, in terms of it takes longer to forget. In other words, you retain the material, the information for longer. So that means next time you should let more time pass before reviewing to allow yourself time to forget a little, so then your review will be effective. It's harder, but that's how it's effective. And this cycle of reviewing with increasing intervals, this is called spaced repetition, and that's something that we recommend. So reviewing the material at different times, at different intervals, also helps. So you should space out your reviews more for material you're more familiar with, that you really know, and then keep time shorter in terms of when you need to review for the material that you're less familiar with. They've found that using this method, your efficiency studying can be increased up to 40%. Retrieval can be hard. Reviewing should be hard. I know you don't want to hear this, but it should be challenging. This is from the movie Inside Out, Joy and Sadness. Trying to remember something you've forgotten helps you learn and remember it better. Learning is maximized if you do it actively. That extra effort actually helps you, though it can feel very frustrating. It's good to space out your practice, but you need to take breaks to be effective. So take a break before reviewing, but don't nap or sleep first. This is a slide of students learning. Some of you might be in there, and then some other students in that lovely green area on a nicer, warmer day, just playing. And that's fine. You need to do that every now and again. Another reason for spaced learning is that forgetting is important for remembering. We don't want to forget, but it's important. Without the forgetting, you get no benefit from extra studying. That extra effort increases the neural pathways, allowing new ones to solidify for the creation of long-term memory. The forgetting index, 20% for greatest increase in strength of memory. But it's hard, so maybe 10% would be okay. This slide shows an example of spaced practice that you practice at increasingly longer intervals. So the first repetition, you do it on the first day. The second, depending on whether you need the information quickly or a test is coming, then maybe 7 days, etc. And you kind of increase that as you become more familiar with the material. So after reviewing information from your most current class, you've got to study more important older information to keep it fresh. You'll study more efficiently because you'll spend more time on the flashcards or information that you need to pay more attention to. Here's one method that works for many people using flashcards. Every card starts in box 1. And then when you get a card right, it graduates to the next box. As you become more proficient, the time between reviews can be longer. If you get a card wrong, though, at any point, then it goes back to to box 1, no matter where it was. So if you got all the way to box 5, where you decrease the amount of frequency that you need to review it, but then you forget or you get something wrong, then you go all the way back to box 1. So then that interval would be you review it every day instead of retiring it and studying just before the test. So if you have some cards and then you're getting them right, start reviewing every day and you get it right, then you can graduate that to box 2 and you review it every other day. And then you still have some cards in box 1 and some cards in box 2, and then as the ones that you're reviewing every other day, once those are really cemented, then you can go to once a week, and then etc. goes to once every 2 weeks, or then you retire and just study before the test. But at any point, if you get something wrong that you've been reviewing once a week, you've got to do it back to every day. Okay. And then after all your boxes are set up, then all you need to do is to create recurring events on your calendar, so you know when to study each box. Here are some examples of space practice apps. I've heard Anki is the most popular one and probably very user friendly. Oops. Yeah. So example of timing for space practice as it relates to how far in the future your exam or test might be. So as you get closer to your exam, you need to review the material more frequently. So if you're a week before your exam, you're talking about 1 to 2 days, reviewing it frequently, and then you might have a gap of a day where you give it a break. So then you forget a little bit, and then the review becomes easier and more effective. If you have about a month before a test, then again you have all your different boxes, but then the study gap, the time between things, then you could probably go to a week, if etc. etc. So the further out your exam or test is, then you don't need to review that. You can have a longer period of time between practice, and then you kind of ramp up. Okay, so this is what many people do. We've all done it, I know that. And cramming or mass practice. It's easy to see improvement. You study hard, you're working on one type of thing at a time. You see rapid gains and short-term satisfaction because you feel like, you're recognizing facts more quickly and things seem more familiar. There's instant gratification with higher scores for immediate tests. But the effects melt away and are not long-term. You're stuffing things in your head quickly, but there's faster forgetting. And the other problem with this is if something was to happen to you and you don't feel well when you're supposed to be cramming, something happens to your life that's out of your control, you run out of time, or you don't get enough sleep, then you start forgetting things from your short-term memory. I've seen this happen to students, so don't fall in this trap. Okay, so what should you do instead, right? This is called space practice. So in the one before, this is the cramming thing. Exam is coming up, and then the day before, you're just cramming in 6 hours straight for this exam. And you don't even start thinking about the exam after that. Exam B, the day before, you cram 6 hours solid for that exam. And then once you get through that, then you start studying for exam C and you start cramming for that. Okay. So the alternate way is this space practice. And what you do is you spread out, in this one, you have 6 hours of study for each subject. But in this one, you can spread out your 6 hours over more time. You're spending the same amount of time for each of your exams, but spaced out. And actually, once you get the hang of this, because you're studying more efficiently, you can actually spend less time. So instead of spending 6 hours for exam A, you might end up studying 5 hours, really. It's just more efficient, just interleaving, and also spacing it out, because every time you forget a little, it challenges you more. But then your brain, the connections, it's actually more effective. It might not feel that way. So you might want to try this when you've got a smaller test or something, and then just to test it out if you don't believe me and the research. But this is a method that has worked. So then you retain the material better and you spend less time overall. When you're building your study schedule, make sure you allow time for flexibility because things happen. So in this example, exam A is again the first one you deal with. So, a week before, you're studying maybe an hour for exam A, but you also start studying for exam B, even though that's the day after exam A. And then next day, you might study an hour for A and B, but you might also add exam C because, that's getting close to a week before that exam. Then the next day, you might give B and C a break because you've got a bit of time before that happens, and you study for an hour for A. Then the spaced practice, you might give the material for exam A a break and then study B and C. And then you go back to A because you allowed a little bit of time to forget some of that material. And so then when you restudy it, then it helps you remember it better. And then so as, you can see the pattern as it goes along. And then, before exam A, make sure you do an hour, you review that material, some of that material the day before. Same thing with exam B the day before, but you also interleaving material for exam C. Okay. So I'm going to leave you with this quote from the book Make It Stick. The responsibility for learning rests with each individual. Your professors want you to be successful and will support and guide you, but it's really in your hands. Here are some references that may be helpful to you, and if you want to talk to me, meet with me some other time, feel free to email. And all the best with your studying and learning.